David was always coming in late, always angry at someone, always feeling like the world was out to get him. His family didn't understand him. His boss had it out for him. His neighbors were watching him. At least, that's according to David. Now, initially, you might think this individual's really anxious about his world. He's really potentially just paranoid about what's going on with the people around him. And the more you work with David, the more you start to realize and feel this goes beyond just being a little anxious. This may be a personality disorder, specifically with somebody like him, potentially a paranoid personality disorder. His belief wasn't just fears. They were deeply ingrained and a rigid aspect of who he was as an individual. That's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. We're going to talk about personality disorders. They're not just traits, they're fixed patterns of behavior that go way back, and they impact nearly every part of a person's life. Welcome back to the Licensure Lifeline podcast. I'm your host, Matt Lawson, and we are looking at personality disorders today. Now, personality disorders are one of these aspects of the mental health world that oftentimes get thrown up on televisions and movies. I mean, how often have you heard narcissism thrown around, or narcissistic personality, or psychopath thrown around at somebody, and it just becomes like this pop culture piece without the person that is being labeled, or the person that is doing the labeling, actually understanding what that means. Of course, as clinicians, we need to do better than that, right? We need to really understand what these personality disorders mean beyond them just labeling bad behavior. So today we're going to look at the different clusters that a lot of these personality disorders fall under. So cluster A, cluster B, cluster C. And by the end of the episode, I'm really hoping that I give you a nice foundation for understanding personality disorders just a little bit better, both for the test and for your practice. Before we get into the personality disorders, let's take a quick look at what's in the news. Enhancing mental health with artificial intelligence. This is a very interesting topic to me, but this article looked at current trends around the use of AI with mental health and the direction that it could take therapy in the future. So it's a comprehensive review. It really explores the integration of AI into mental health care, and some of the current trends that we're seeing around emerging technology. I think one of the biggest fears that I'm hearing from other therapists is being replaced by AI. And, there's already some pretty effective chatbots that are online. If you've ever looked at like Character AI, that's one of them. There's also a couple of organizations that have some mental health specific large language models that can provide some pretty decent support for individuals looking for mental health support online. So, the really interesting article, of course, I will post this in the show notes. But something that I really want a lot of people to understand and potentially embrace for the future of technology and mental health is the idea of being able to use this alongside of the work that we do. I don't think technology is ever going to be able to replace that human touch, that ability for one person to sit in a room or even in video with somebody else and really give them that sense of space that they need with another human being. I don't think AI is going to ever be able to replicate that. Maybe in the distant future, when we're extremely used to robots, you might see a robotic version of a therapist sitting in a room. But I think that's pretty far down the line. So I think our jobs are safe for now. Let's move on to the study stack tip, a strategy that not only makes learning easier, but actually reorganizes how your brain stores information. It's called chunking. The idea is simple. Instead of trying to memorize a huge list of isolated facts, you group related concepts together into chunks of information. This is how like when you think of something like a phone number, you don't remember it often as 10 random digits. You remember it as a group, right? Like it's very specific. Like it's the same thing with like license plate numbers. There's a reason why there's a certain amount of numbers and letters in phone numbers and license plates, is because they actually chunking it together in a certain way makes it easier for us to remember. So when you think of the application to something like remembering personality disorder clusters, chunking together things like the different clusters versus memorizing each individual personality disorder separately, is going to benefit you more. So really chunking together like cluster A, cluster B, cluster C into a group of things, and having little pieces around that that remind you of that. If you've listened to previous episodes, I would come up with those like acronyms that I would use to help you memorize certain things. And you can do the same thing with these clusters, memorizing the acronym within the cluster versus just trying to remember each individual thing actually helps you study better. But this is something I used to use in grad school, doing grad school a lot. I'd write out a chunked list of things versus just the individual things. And it was just easier for me to remember these things in chunks, specifically if I wrote them down. And on to the main topic today, personality disorders, specifically the clusters of personality disorders. So you have three clusters: cluster A, cluster B, cluster C. Cluster A, you see the more what they would consider, it's considered in DSM, like odd and eccentric type personality disorders. Cluster B is dramatic, emotional, and erratic, and cluster C is anxious and fearful. This will make more sense the more I get into the clusters, how each one kind of filters down which personality disorder is within that cluster. We have the cluster A. This is the odd and eccentric group. So I want you to think of this one as on the fringe. This tends to be people that you see in our society is kind of like on the fringe type of thinking. So the first one here is paranoid personality disorder. Key traits here are distrust and suspicion of others, interpreting benign remarks as threatening, and holds grudges. So I know that this can sound like a lot of people. And it's so important to remember with all personality disorders that the things that we talk about here is a part of who these individuals are. Like they're ingrained as their personality. It's not just kind of this like passing, like everybody can have some suspicion. Everybody can have, a moment of interpreting benign remarks as threatening, but those tend to be more situational versus it being an ingrained piece of who they are as an individual. So David, as the person that I described in that vignette at the very beginning of the show, he had this belief that his neighbors were spying on him, and he might change his entire life around because of this belief, like putting newspaper over his windows, taking different routes home from work so they don't know where he's coming from. But he makes this a part of his world. This belief that his neighbors are spying, or that he has to watch out for his boss. Exam tip with this one: paranoid personality disorder is different from delusional disorder. It's less fixed and pervasive across relationships specifically. Okay, so that's paranoid personality disorder. Next, we have schizoid personality disorder. Key traits here are detachment from social relationships, limited emotional expression, and prefers isolation. So somebody that might get you thinking along these lines is maybe somebody that, tends to work night shifts. They like working night shifts because it kind of keeps them away from other people, and keeps them kind of isolated. Maybe this person also hasn't spoken to his family members in years. Again, like it's not like there aren't people that have this tendency, but also don't have schizoid personality disorder. But if you hear this, it might start you thinking down that line of, oh, is this schizoid? Um, so with this, an exam tip would be people aren't necessarily socially anxious. They simply just don't want the connections. They're just not that interested in them. Last one within this group of cluster A personality disorders is schizotypal personality disorder. So this one, you have odd beliefs, magical thinking, social anxiety, eccentric behavior. Um, Example here might be somebody that wears the same clothes every day to protect against energetic attacks. So in the movies, those people that wear tin helmets to keep the radio waves out, to keep the aliens from hearing their thoughts, that might be schizotypal personality disorder. But again, it's one of those things that we look at and say, huh, maybe, and it gets us at least thinking that as a possibility. Of course, more information will be needed. A history of this needs to be looked at. All right, let's move on to cluster B, dramatic, emotional, and erratic. First up in this category, it's borderline personality disorder. This is another one that I've seen a lot of in my practice. Um, I've worked with probably a dozen or so individuals that have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. The key traits here are fear of abandonment, mood swings, impulsivity, and self harm. So, I don't think I can keep on stressing this enough. We do have to consider big picture here. There are lots of people, and I'm sure in your world, that may have mood swings, but there's more to it, right? With personality disorders, and you need to look at the big picture here. But an example might be a client that swings from loving their partner to despising them within hours. I've actually worked with individuals that in one session will be praising the world that we live in because I'm such an amazing therapist and have helped them so much. And in the very next session, they'll come in and want to talk about taking legal action against me because I've led them down the wrong path and they hate me. But paying attention to those rapid mood shifts is a really important part of understanding um, borderline personality disorder. It can be a day-to-day thing, not just weeks. It really does happen that quick with them. So next up, we have narcissistic personality disorder. Key features here are grandiosity, the need for admiration, and lack of empathy. Um, I think the betrayal of narcissistic personality disorder in movies and TV shows has really done a lot of injustice to this personality disorder type. I think this word gets thrown around way too much to describe any situation with a person where it seems like they're being selfish and really doesn't understand like how deeply ingrained that this personality type can be. It's something to definitely watch out for. I have worked with individuals that have come in to get therapy because their significant other has pointed the finger at them and told them that they are narcissistic and that they need counseling for narcissism. Um, Majority of the time, it tends to be problems in the relationship and not necessarily just because of this person doing a handful of things that were selfish. Every once in a while, they end up having a narcissistic personality disorder. But it's something that you really need to kind of pay attention to, what's going on with the big picture. But the client that, spends more time talking about their own achievements than addressing therapy goals. This is another deflection that you see from people that have narcissistic personality disorder. They tend to talk about everything that's wrong with everybody else around them more than they talk about the things that they want to address in therapy, or the things that they need to address in therapy. And a lot of the times they come in because um, they are having some issues at work or they're having some issues in relationships where people just they can't keep people around them and they come in talking about what's wrong with everybody else in the world. But an exam tip here to differentiate histrionic from narcissistic personalities disorders or people with narcissistic personality disorder really, really want that admiration, not just attention that you see in like histrionic personality disorder. Any social personality disorders also within the cluster Bs. Key traits here is a disregard for others, um, others' rights, specifically impulsivity, deceitfulness. This is the personality disorder that you see serial killers get labeled with in TV shows and movies. Like when they call them psychos, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about antisocial personality disorder. Client here is a history of lying, theft, lack of remorse. They really don't care what impact their actions have on anybody else around them or anything else around them. They just don't care. And it's not that they actually have the caring thought and they disregard the caring thought. It's not there to begin with. So it can be a tricky one, but this, I think, it gets sensationalized a lot. Last in this list is histrionic personality disorder. I touched on a little bit of that with narcissistic personality disorder, but the key traits here is excessive emotionality, attention seeking, and dramatic behavior. So that client that dramatically cries and gestures during session, they exaggerate their symptoms. They really want that and crave that like woe is me type moment. They want to they just draw all that attention to themselves. Um, and it is one of the things that does set them apart from narcissistic personality disorder. Okay, let's get into the cluster C types. Um, First up, you have avoidant personality disorder. Key trait here is, or traits, are hypersensitivity to rejection, social inhibition, and that fear of criticism. So that client who avoids social events because right off the bat, their head goes to what if they embarrass themselves? So it's sad because a lot of people with avoidant personality disorder end up missing out a lot on life because of such an ingrained fear of things like embarrassment. An exam tip here: avoidant personality disorders often want connection but fear rejection, unlike schizoid personality disorder. Next up, we have dependent personality disorder. Key traits are submissiveness, clingy behavior, fear of separation, difficulty making decisions. Clients who repeatedly ask their partner for advice on simple tasks. Okay. And I know, again, what you're thinking. Like, this can sound like somebody in your life. Um, but there is a difference between dependent behavior and dependent personality disorders. And as clinicians, we need to figure out how to distinguish that. So just heads up. Exam tip here: differentiate from avoidant. Dependent personality disorder seeks approval, even if it's at risk of criticism. Next up, or the last one actually in this cluster, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Key traits here: preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, control. This is that client who cannot delegate work because they want it done themselves. Like, they don't feel like if they hand off the work that they have to do, it's going to be done correctly. So they tend to take on a lot, which, hey, great person to have on your team, right? They're going to do all the work for that class project. They're going to, be that person at your job that's going to take on all the tasks of your entire department. But you can imagine how that can also lead to a lot of crashing and burning. So a tip here is this is not the same as OCD. There aren't really any intrusive thoughts with this one. This is just how the person is. It's what they do. They don't necessarily have these thoughts that are like damning them and guilting them into doing this stuff, similar to what you get with OCD. Okay, that was a lot. I hope you got something out of that. Let's get into some questions you might see on the NCE. First up, which of the following personality disorders is characterized by a pervasive distrust and suspicion of others, even without sufficient evidence. A. Schizoid personality disorder. B. Paranoid personality disorder. C. Borderline personality disorder. Or D. Antisocial personality disorder. Answer here is going to be B. Paranoid personality disorder. The rationale behind this thought is paranoid personality disorder is marked by deep mistrust and suspicion of others, often interpreting benign interactions as malicious. Schizoid involves detachment. Borderline involves instability in relationships and mood. Antisocial is marked by the disregard for others' rights. Question number 2. A client describes feeling intensely emotional, frequently seeking attention, and dramatizing minor issues in a relationship. Which personality disorder is this most likely fit? Is it A, histrionic personality disorder, B, narcissistic personality disorder, C, borderline personality disorder, or D, dependent personality disorder? This one is going to be A, histrionic personality disorder. So, histrionic personality disorder is characterized by excessive emotionality and attention seeking. Narcissistic is more focused on admiration and superiority. Borderline features instability and impulsivity, and dependent focuses on clinginess and fear of separation. Question number 3. Which personality disorder is categorized under Cluster C and is known for preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and control? Is it A, avoidant personality disorder, B, dependent personality disorder, C, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, or D, paranoid personality disorder? Answer is C, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. OCPD is part of a cluster C, anxious, fearful, and involves extreme perfectionism and a need for control. This is distinct from OCD, which involves intrusive thoughts. That's really the distinguisher there, is the intrusive thoughts piece. Question number 4. Which of the following best differentiates borderline personality disorder, BPD, from bipolar disorder? Is it A, mood instability, B, impulsivity, C, length of mood changes, or D, relationship difficulties? This is a tough one. Answer is going to be C, length of mood changes. Mood swings in borderline personality disorder are often day to day or even hour to hour, while with bipolar disorder, mood episodes last for days or weeks. Impulsivity and relationship issues can appear in both. Question number 5. Which personality disorder is most associated with a lack of empathy and a need for admiration? Is it antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, or schizotypal personality disorder? Answer to this one's going to be B, narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder is defined by grandiosity, a need for admiration, and a distinct lack of empathy. Antisocial personality involves more manipulation and a disregard for others' rights. Histrionic focuses on attention. Schizotypal is marked by odd things. Remember, schizotypal, aluminum hat on the head to keep out alien signals. Okay, that is it for the questions. This one, personality disorders was always one of those really fascinating areas for me. But they can be tricky. And it's really worth like putting some time into getting to know them. A lot of clinicians do not like working with individuals that have personality disorders, and it might be a really great area for you to kind of carve out your niche. If you can figure out how to best work with these individuals. So thank you for listening, and until next time, keep learning.